This is the first time Charles will have heard the treason charges in full. He's trying to keep us cool. He's looking at the judges, he's giving them a hard stare. But when he hears those words, tyrant, traitor, murderer, he laughs out loud. And this is a mistake because he is treating the court with scorn.
Lord President Bradshaw instructs the king to answer the charges. The king pauses. Then he plays his card. Charles responds. First, I must know by what power I am called hither before I will give answer. By what authority? I mean lawful authority. Remember, I am your king, your lawful king. I have trust committed to me by God. Charles refuses to plead. He refuses to acknowledge the legal authority of the court. He states that he is king by divine right, and no power can remove him from his God-given position. The legitimacy of the court hangs in abeyance.
The king was expected to plead guilty or not guilty. He refused to plead. This was the most sensible thing he could possibly do, because he was then throwing back at the tribunal the problem that they always recognized. How can we try a king legally?
It's a good opening gambit. It succeeds in rattling the judges a little bit, but it's going to be hard to sustain. This is only day one, and he is one man against many.
The king's strategy works. Cromwell and Bradshaw are left with no choice but to adjourn. Charles leaves the court triumphant to cries of "God save the king." At the end of the first day, it's the king 1, Parliament 0.
On the first day of his trial, Charles wins the contest completely. The commissioners have to withdraw. They are nonplussed by what happened. He flummoxes them. And they knew that this was going to happen. Cromwell had already anticipated that Charles would deny the authority of the court, and that's precisely what he did. And they still had got a good answer to him, because there wasn't one.
On the other hand, the trial is underway. It looks like a real trial. And they've got the bonus of the king grappling for his silver tip.
That night, the king is drawn into another battle.
Charles spends the night in a private house where he has soldiers guarding him, even in his bedroom, and they're allowed to smoke and drink in his private rooms, so he has no privacy.
The furious king demands that the guards leave him to sleep. After an angry dispute, he gets his way. It's day 2 of the trial.
On day 2, the most important thing is that there is a day 2. In English criminal history, there usually wasn't a day 2. Trials all had to complete within one day.
Westminster Hall is so noisy that Lord President John Bradshaw orders silence on pain of imprisonment. On the first day, the king had refused to plead to John Cook's charges. The court has no right to try him, Charles maintains. This is a problem for Cromwell and the commissioners, but potentially an even bigger one for Charles.
The punishment for refusing to enter a plea is to be pressed to death. It's a medieval punishment, and it's not obsolete. As recently as Elizabeth I's reign, a woman was pressed to death. She was ordered to lie down on a sharp stone. A door was placed on top of her. And 700 or 800 weight was put on top of that until she was crushed to death. Nobody wants to see that happen to the king.
Again, Charles refuses to plead. In justification, he plays a trump card. He aligns himself with the people. Charles explains that if he can be legitimately tried by this self-appointed court outside of conventional jurisdiction, then it could try anyone. No one is safe. If power without law make any laws, I do not know what subject in England can be sure of his life or anything he calls his own. It is not my case alone, but the freedom and liberty of the people. In refusing to recognise this court, then, Charles claims he's acting to protect his people.
He sees around him power, the power of the sword. But does power have the right to make law? No. And if he is to accept the court, then he is basically going to let the people of England live in a country where whoever has the sword makes the laws, and they can make it up as they go along. And as he says, who would have any liberties then?
This is the king's cleverest move. Rather than being portrayed as the person who is suborning the rights and liberties of the people, he portrays himself as the champion of the rights and liberties of the people. He is the defender of the law. He is the defender of the ordinary person who could be oppressed by Parliament. He is not the tyrant. Who's the tyrant? Parliament's the tyrant.
Lord President Bradshaw listens to this. He decides he has heard enough. He spits. How great a friend you have been to the laws and liberties of the people. Let all England and the world judge.
The king is determined not to fight the merits of the charge, which means he has to keep himself to his one legal point, that this is not a lawful court. But inevitably, in his argument with Bradshaw, he steps over the line. And at one point he says, I stand for the liberty of the subject more than you do. That was why I was forced to take to, and he suddenly realizes that he's about to say why he was forced to take to arms. And that, of course, was the case against him, that he started the Civil War. So he came perilously close then, and I think everyone realized that that was a sort of semi-confession, and he drew back. He realized he'd made a mistake.
The king has lost composure today. He seems irritated and argumentative. Perhaps he feels that his strategy isn't working. In this battle of wills and legislation, the prosecution is gaining ground. Next time, Parliament battles to break the legal stalemate.
Its central message was that no one is above the law.
But the threat of a treason charge still hangs over those who would convict a monarch.
It speaks volumes about what a radical thing this really is.
And as the bitter end draws near, not even Parliament is ready for the consequences.
It is just an extraordinary thing that they rushed this legislation through minutes before the blade was going to chop the king's head off.